March 17, 1944. North Atlantic. The freezing waters churn violently as HMS Bluebell races toward a confirmed EO boat contact. Below the surface, U-377 desperately maneuvers to escape, but this time, something is different. The German commander doesn't hear the familiar splash of depth charges hitting the water behind him. Instead, a salvo of 24 projectiles arcs through the air ahead of the British corvette, hitting the water 200 yards in front of the ship. 7 seconds later, the ocean erupts. Contact-detonated explosions tear through U-377's pressure hull. The U-boat surfaces, mortally wounded, her crew scrambling on deck before she slips beneath the waves forever. HMS Bluebell has just scored a kill with a weapon that would revolutionize naval warfare, the Hedgehog. This is the story of how to weapons the conventional depth charge and the revolutionary Hedgehog. The underwater battlefield of World War II. One represented the old way of hunting submarines, dropping explosives behind your ship and hoping. The other pioneered a new philosophy: strike ahead with precision and certainty. The numbers tell a shocking story. Depth charges achieved U-boat kills only 5 to 7% of the time. The Hedgehog, over 25%. In the desperate struggle for control of the Atlantic, this difference meant the survival or starvation of Britain itself. Today, we're diving deep into the technical specifications, tactical evolution, and dramatic combat history of these two revolutionary anti-submarine weapons. We'll explore why depth charges, despite their limitations, remained the backbone of ASW throughout the war. We'll uncover the brilliant engineering that made the Hedgehog so deadly, and we'll witness the actual battles where these weapons determined who lived and who died in the cold, dark depths of the ocean. This is the untold story of innovation under fire. This is Hedgehog versus depth charges. The submarine, THRAT. To understand why these weapons became so critical, we first need to understand the threat they were designed to counter. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, the Kriegsmarine possessed only 57 U-boats, far fewer than the 300 Admiral Karl Dönitz believed necessary to strangle Britain's maritime lifeline. But what they lacked in numbers, they compensated for in tactical innovation and sheer audacity. Britain was and remains an island nation dependent on imports for survival. In 1939, over 60 million tons of cargo arrived by sea annually: food, fuel, raw materials, and war supplies. Every week, Britain required 1 million tons of imports just to maintain basic civilian consumption and war production. The convoy system, proven effective in World War I, was immediately re-established. Merchant ships would travel in groups, protected by naval escorts equipped with depth charges and ASDIC, the British acronym for what Americans called sonar. But the U-boats had evolved since 1918. The Type 7, Germany's workhorse submarine, could dive to 750 feet, travel at 17 knots on the surface, and carried 14 torpedoes. More importantly, commanders like Gunther Prien, Otto Kretschmer, and Joachim Schepke had perfected the Wolfpack tactics that Dönitz had theorized in the interwar years. Instead of attacking submerged during daylight, U-boats would track convoys on the surface at night, using their low silhouette and superior surface speed to close in for multiple attacks. The results were catastrophic. In the 6 months following the fall of France in June 1940, a period, U-boat commanders called the Happy Time German submarines sank over 270 Allied ships totaling 1.4 million tons. The Escorts' depth charges proved woefully inadequate. U-boats could hear the Escorts' ASDIC transmissions and take evasive action. They could dive deep and maneuver wildly while the Escort lost contact overhead. And even when depth charges exploded nearby, the U-boat might survive with repairable damage. By the end of 1940, Britain's shipping losses exceeded new construction by a devastating margin. If the trend continued, Britain would be forced out of the war by starvation and industrial collapse within a year. Prime Minister Winston Churchill later wrote, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. The Battle of the Atlantic had begun in earnest, and the Allies were losing badly. The question facing the Royal Navy was simple but desperate. How do you kill submarines that can hear you coming? dive deeper than your weapons can reach, and outmaneuver your attacks? The answer would require rethinking not just weapons technology, but the entire tactical doctrine of anti-submarine warfare. The depth charge technology anti-ICTIC is the depth charge seems simple, almost primitive by modern standards. Take a canister, fill it with 200 to 300 pounds of high explosive, add a pressure-activated or timed fuse, roll it off the back of your ship, and hope it explodes close enough to the submarine to cause fatal damage. Yet this simple weapon dominated anti-submarine warfare for 30 years, and understanding why requires appreciating both its capabilities and its fundamental limitations. Let's start with the British Type D depth charge, the standard weapon at the war's beginning. The Mark 7 version contained 290 pounds of Amatau, explosive in a cylindrical steel canister 18 inches in diameter and 30 inches tall. Two types of pistols, the technical term for fuses, were available: hydrostatic, which detonated at a preset depth, or time delay, which used a clockwork mechanism to explode after a specific interval, when dropped from a ship traveling at 15 knots. The Type D sank at approximately 10 feet per second. This meant reaching a depth setting of 300 feet took 30 seconds, an eternity in underwater combat. During those 30 seconds, several critical things happened. First, the attacking ship moved about 750 feet forward, completely losing ASDIC contact with the submarine once it passed overhead. Second, the submarine, traveling at perhaps 7 to 8 knots, submerged and executing evasive maneuvers, could move 350 to 400 feet from its last known position. Third, ocean currents could push the sinking depth charge off course. When the depth charge finally detonated, it created a gas bubble that expanded rapidly, generating a powerful pressure wave. This was the killing mechanism. A submarine's pressure hull is designed to withstand external pressure from the surrounding water, but it's vulnerable to sudden shock waves. The explosive pressure wave could rupture hull plating, destroy internal equipment, shatter gauges and valves, or cause immediate catastrophic failure if the weapon exploded close enough. But close enough was the critical question. For a certain kill, a depth charge needed to explode within 20 feet of the submarine's hull. Serious damage could occur at 40 to 50 feet. Beyond 100 feet, the submarine would likely survive with minor damage, broken light bulbs, shaken crewmen, perhaps a small leak. The problem was that the ocean is three-dimensional, and a submarine 300 feet down had enormous space to maneuver. Standard doctrine called for dropping a pattern of 5 or more depth charges, creating a three-dimensional grid of explosions that theoretically trapped the submarine in a lethal zone. The most common pattern was the 5-charge diamond, 1 charge on each corner of a diamond shape, with a 5th in the center. Later in the war, patterns expanded to 10 or 14 charges as more launchers were installed on escort ships. Let me describe a typical attack as experienced by both sides. HMS Wanderer, a W-class destroyer, has obtained ASDIC contact with a U-boat at 1,200 yards. The operator calls out, "Contact bearing 0 for 5 degrees, range 1,200 yards, moving left." The captain orders, "Action stations, set depth charges to 350 feet, prepare pattern delta." As Wanderer accelerates to 20 knots, her ASDIC pings continuously, tracking the submarine's position. Range, 800 yards, 400 yards, 200 yards. At 200 yards, a critical problem emerges. The ASDIC dome is located on the ship's hull below the waterline. As the destroyer closes in, the angle becomes too steep there. ASDIC can no longer track directly below the ship. The operator loses contact. From this point, the attack is essentially blind, relying on dead reckoning to estimate where the submarine should be. Inside the U-boat, the crew hears everything. The ASDIC pings grow louder and more frequent. Bing ... bing ... bing ... bing. Then suddenly, silence as the destroyer passes overhead. The commander knows exactly what this means. Depth charges are coming. He orders, "All ahead, full, hard left rudder, down angle on planes, take her to 600 feet. The U-boat's electric motors scream as she dives and turns desperately. WHAM. The first depth charge explodes 150 feet away. The submarine heaves violently, light bulbs shatter, cork insulation rains down. Wham! Wham! 4 more charges detonate in rapid succession. The boat twists and bucks like a wild animal. Crewmen are thrown against bulkheads. Water sprays from a cracked valve, but the U-boat survives. The closest explosion was 80 feet away, close enough to terrify, not close enough to kill. This scenario repeated thousands of times across the Atlantic, Arctic, and Mediterranean between 1939 and 1945. Comprehensive analysis of depth charge attacks reveals sobering statistics. In the first 3 years of the war, approximately 5,000 depth charge attacks were recorded. These attacks resulted in only 38 confirmed E-boat kills, a success rate of 0.76%, even when restricting analysis to attacks where ASDIC contact was maintained until the final approach. The kill rate improved only to 5 to 7%. The Royal Navy wasn't complacent about these dismal results. Constant improvements were implemented throughout the war. The Mark 8 depth charge increased the explosive charge to 400 pounds of mineral. More powerful explosive mixture. Faster sinking heavy depth charges were developed, reaching depth more quickly. The Fairley mortar, and later the Mark 10 projector, could throw depth charges out to the side of the ship, expanding the attack pattern. Perhaps most importantly, doctrine evolved. Escort commanders learned to maintain contact longer before attacking, to use multiple ships in coordinated patterns, and to make repeated attacks that wore down the submarine even if they didn't achieve immediate kills. Groups like Captain F.J. Johnny Walker's second support group perfected creeping attacks, where one ship held ASDIC contact, while a second ship crept in slowly to attack, maintaining contact until the last possible moment. Yet despite all improvements, the fundamental limitation remained. Depth charges required the attacking ship to pass over the submarine's position. Losing contact at the critical moment, the weapon was reactive rather than proactive, defensive rather than offensive. What the Allies needed was a weapon that could attack while maintaining contact, a weapon that could strike ahead rather than That weapon was already being developed, but its path to operational service would be neither quick nor easy. The birth of the Hedgehog story of the Hedgehog begins not in the heat of battle, but in the methodical world of British weapons development. In 1940, as the Battle of Britain raged overhead, engineers at the Admiralty's Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, the Wheezers and Dodgers, as Churchill affectionately called them, were wrestling with the depth charge problem from first principles. The key figure was Lieutenant Commander Charles Goodhue, a Canadian chemist and physicist who brought scientific rigor to naval weapons development. Goodhue understood that the depth charge's fundamental flaw wasn't the explosive power, it was the delivery method. "We're attacking where the submarine was, not where it is," he noted in a 1940 memo. "By the time our depth charges reach attack depth, the target has moved and we've lost all means of tracking it." The solution seemed obvious. Develop a weapon that could be fired ahead of the ship while ASDIC contact was maintained. But the engineering challenges were enormous. The weapon needed to travel at least 200 yards forward to clear the ship's bow wave and provide adequate standoff distance. It needed to sink quickly enough to engage submarines before they could evade. It needed to be accurate enough to hit a target approximately 100 feet long and 20 feet wide, and critically, it needed to detonate only on contact with a submarine, not when hitting the water, the ocean floor, or by mistake. The first concept, developed in late 1940, was called the AS-bomb anti-submarine bomb. This was a 65-pound projectile with 30 pounds of high explosive and a contact fuse. A spigot mortar system would launch 24 projectiles simultaneously in an elliptical pattern ahead of the ship. Each bomb was stabilized by fins and designed to sink nose down at approximately 23 feet per second, more than twice the rate of conventional depth charges. The launching system was ingeniously simple. 24 steel spigots were arranged in rows on a steel cradle mounted on the ship's foredeck. Each projectile had a tubular tail boom that slid over a spigot. A small propellant charge in the spigot would fire, launching the projectile up and forward. The entire salvo could be fired in less than 1 second, creating an elliptical pattern covering an area approximately 140 feet by 120 feet at the point of water entry. But the most critical innovation was the contact fuse. Previous attempts at forward-throwing weapons had failed because the fuses either detonated prematurely when hitting the water or failed to detonate at all. Goodev's team developed a mechanical fuse with a weighted striker held in place by a soluble plug. When the bomb entered the water, the plug would dissolve over 2 to 3 seconds, arming the fuse. After that, any solid contact would drive the striker forward into the detonator, initiating the explosion. Testing began in early 1941 aboard HMS Westcott, a W-class destroyer. The results were ... mixed. The spigots worked perfectly, launching all projectiles within a fraction of a second. The elliptical pattern was consistent and predictable, but the contact fuses proved temperamental. Some bombs exploded on water entry. Others failed to detonate even when directly striking the target submarine hulk used for testing. Accuracy was also problematic. Wind, ship motion, and variations in propellant charges all affected the pattern. 6 months of intensive development followed. The fuse design was revised 17 times. The propellant charges were standardized and tested under various temperature conditions. The spigot length was modified to improve projectile stability. Most importantly, a training program was developed because firing the Hedgehog required precise ship handling and timing that depth charge. Attacks did not. By December 1941, the weapon was ready for operational trials. The Admiralty, desperate for any advantage in the increasingly dire Battle of the Atlantic, ordered immediate production. The weapon received its official designation, Projector, Anti-Submarine, Mark 10, but sailors quickly gave it a more memorable name, inspired by the bristling rows of spigots that resembled a hedgehog's spines. The Hedgehog installation began on escort vessels in early 1942. The standard Mark 10 Hedgehog weighed approximately 1 ton and required a reinforced deck mounting. Training crews to use it effectively took several weeks. The commander needed to maintain steady speed and heading during the final approach. No sudden maneuvers that would disrupt the ASDIC solution. The firing solution required calculating the submarine's depth, speed, and course, then firing at precisely the right moment so the projectiles would arrive at the submarine's predicted position. The first Hedgehog installations went to corvettes and frigates of Western Approaches Command in March 1942. The weapon's baptism of fire would come soon enough, but many escort commanders were skeptical. Depth charges were familiar, proven, and psychologically reassuring, if they rarely achieved kills. The massive explosions gave crews confidence that they were hurting the enemy. The Hedgehog, by contrast, was silent unless it hit. No explosion meant no hit, which meant the submarine was still out there, probably preparing to fire torpedoes. Captain Donald McIntyre, one of Britain's most successful U-boat hunters, later recalled, "When they first showed us the Hedgehog, we thought it was a ridiculous contraption. 24 small bombs that only exploded if they hit. That seemed like trying to shoot a fish in a barrel while blindfolded. We wanted our big depth charge patterns that shook the sea and terrified the U. It took actual combat experience to show us that terrorizing the enemy wasn't the same as killing him. That combat experience would begin in the cold, brutal waters of the North Atlantic, where the fate of Britain and the outcome of the war hung in the balance. The Hedgehog was about to prove that precision could defeat volume, that surgical strikes could achieve what hammer blows could not. But first, it would have to overcome skepticism, technical problems, and the deadly experience of veteran U-boat commanders who had survived hundreds of depth charge attacks. Comparative Combat EFFC TIV in ESA Spring 1942. The Battle of the Atlantic was reaching its crescendo. U-boat production had accelerated. Germany was launching 20 new submarines per month. Admiral Dönitz now had over 100 operational U-boats, enough to implement true wolfpack tactics on a devastating scale. In the first 6 months of 1942, U-boats sank 585 Allied ships totaling over 3 million tons. At this rate, Germany would win the Atlantic battle by simple mathematics. To understand why the Hedgehog proved so revolutionary, we need to compare it directly with depth charges in real combat conditions. Let's construct a detailed scenario based on actual after-action reports from 1940 to 1943. Scenario 1. HMS Bluebell detects U-377 at 1,400 yards. The corvette is equipped with conventional depth charge rails and throwers. Here's what happens. The ASDIC operator tracks the contact, calling out bearing and range continuously. At 400 yards, Bluebell accelerates to 18 knots for the attack run. At 200 yards, the steep angle breaks ASDIC contact. The captain must estimate the submarine's position based on its last known course and speed. U-377's commander has decades of collective experience among his crew and has already initiated evasive maneuvers. The U-boat diving officer calls out, "Negative bubble, flood auxiliary tanks, down angle 15 degrees, left full rudder." U-377 noses down steeply, turning hard to port while accelerating to maximum submerged speed. The British depth charges, set for 350 feet, sink at their standard 10 feet per second. During the 35 seconds of sink time, U-377 moves approximately 400 feet laterally and descends to 450 feet below the depth charge setting. 10 depth charges explode in a carefully calculated pattern. The submarine shudders violently. Interior lighting fails. The crew is terrified. But when the emergency lights come on and damage reports arrive, the result is 1 cracked valve, minor flooding in the bilges, and shattered nerves. U-377 survives because the closest explosion was 90 feet away, close enough for psychological effect, too far for fatal damage. Now, Scenario 2. HMS Bluebell, equipped with a Hedgehog system, detects U-377 at the same 1,400 yards. The crucial difference begins immediately. The ASDIC operator tracks the contact, calling out depth, bearing range, and estimated course. Unlike the depth charge attack, Bluebell doesn't need to accelerate. In fact, a steady 12 knots is preferable for Hedgehog accuracy. At 400 yards, instead of breaking off ASDIC contact, Bluebell maintains steady tracking. The fire control team calculates the firing solution. Submarine depth, 280 feet. Course 170 degrees. Speed estimated at 7 knots. The captain orders, "Stand by Hedgehog. Steady on course 045. Maintain 12 knots." At 300 yards, while still maintaining solid ASDIC contact, the order comes, "Fire Hedgehog." 24 projectiles arc through the air in just under 1 second. They hit the water 200 yards ahead of Bluebell in an elliptical pattern. Inside U-377, the crew hears the splash as 24 distinct impacts on the surface above them. The commander knows exactly what this means. Hedgehog attack. But unlike depth charges, he doesn't know when the explosions will come because there are no timed fuses. The bombs are sinking at 23 feet per second, almost twice as fast as depth charges. U-377's diving officer begins the same evasive sequence. Hard turn, steep down angle. But just 12 seconds after water entry before the U-boats can build significant lateral movement, 3 Hedgehog projectiles strike the submarine's hull in rapid succession. Boom, boom. The contact detonated explosives punch through the pressure hull. Water blasts in at crushing pressure. U-377's fate is sealed in 3 seconds. This scenario, repeated across thousands of engagements, produced dramatically different results. Let's examine the comprehensive statistics compiled by the Royal Navy's Anti-Submarine Warfare Division. Depth charge attacks 194 to 1943. Total attacks, approximately 4,200 confirmed. Kills 87 U-boat. Rate 2.07% when improving to good contact. Maintained 5 to 7% average depth charges per attack. 10 to 14 average depth charges per kill. 182 to 00 Hedgehog attacks. 1943 to 1945. Total attacks, approximately 280 confirmed. Kills 47 U-boat. Success rate 16.8% with well-trained crews, 22 to 25% average. Projectiles per attack, 2 for projectiles per kill, approximately 140 to 160. The Hedgehog achieved roughly 5 times the kill rate of conventional depth charges, but raw percentages don't tell the complete story. Let's examine why the Hedgehog was so much more effective. The single biggest advantage was maintaining ASDIC contact until projectile launch. This eliminated the 30 to 45 second blind period during which submarines could execute evasive maneuvers. Hedgehog attacks were based on real-time tracking, not dead reckoning estimates. Hedgehog projectiles sank more than twice as fast as depth charges, reducing the submarine's time to evade. From splash to impact at 300 feet took only 13 seconds versus 30 seconds for depth charges. This meant the submarine traveled only 150 to 170 feet versus 350-400 feet during weapon sink time. This proved psychologically and tactically crucial. Depth charges exploded whether they hit or not, producing spectacular displays but often missing the target. Hedgehog was binary. Silence meant miss, explosion meant hit. This provided immediate battle damage assessment. If you heard explosions, the submarine was damaged or destroyed. If silence, prepare for another attack. Depth charge explosions created massive turbulence and acoustic interference that prevented ASDIC contact for 10 to 15 minutes after an attack. During this period, the submarine could escape or reposition. Hedgehog attacks that missed produced no explosions and no interference. The attacking ship could immediately execute another attack without waiting for the water to settle. By mid-1943, experienced Hedgehog-equipped escorts had developed sophisticated attack doctrines. The most effective was the double deliberate attack. First salvo fired at calculated point of submarine's current position. If no detonation, maintain contact and fire second salvo 30 seconds later at updated position. This technique proved devastating because the submarine, focused on evading the first attack, often maneuvered directly into the second. Some escort groups developed combined tactics using both weapons. Hedgehog-equipped ships would make the initial precision attack while maintaining contact. If this failed to kill, depth charge-equipped ships would follow with massive saturation patterns. This combination forced submarines into an impossible choice: evade the Hedgehog and be vulnerable to depth charges, or evade the depth charges and present a steadier target for the next. Hedgehog attack. German U-boat commanders learned to fear the Hedgehog. Captain Lieutenant Peter Kremer, who survived the war, later wrote, "Depth charges were terrifying, but survivable if you were deep and lucky. The Hedgehog was different. You heard the splashes, counted the seconds, and waited for the killing blow. No warning explosions, no near misses that let you adjust course. Just silence or death. We came to dread the sound of those projectiles hitting the water above us." Yet the Hedgehog wasn't perfect. It required extensive training. Poorly trained crews achieved kill rates no better than depth charges. The contact fuses were sensitive to temperature and could be unreliable in extreme cold. The elliptical pattern, while effective, was smaller than the massive three-dimensional box created by 14 charge depth charge patterns. And psychologically, many commanders still preferred the reassuring thunder of depth charge explosions to the eerie silence of Hedgehog misses. These statistical realities and tactical considerations meant that both weapons coexisted throughout the war. Depth charges remained standard armament on all escorts, while Hedgehogs were installed as primary weapons on new construction and as retrofits on existing ships when possible. The question wasn't either or, but when and how to employ each weapon for maximum effect. That question would be answered in the desperate convoy battles and U-boat hunts that raged across the Atlantic through 1943 and 1944. Famous engagements and key. Let's examine specific engagements where these weapons determined life and death, victory and defeat. These aren't just statistics, they're the stories of men who fought in the most savage maritime campaign in history. March 11, 1943, Mid-Atlantic. The war is at its crisis point this month. We'll see the highest Allied shipping losses of the entire war. HMS Harvester, an H-class destroyer commanded by Commander Alexander Tate, is escorting Convoy HX-228 when ASDIC contact is gained at 2,200 yards. Harvester was equipped with both conventional depth charges and one of the early Hedgehog installations. Tate, an experienced commander with 3 U-boat kills to his credit, had trained extensively with the new weapon but had never achieved a Hedgehog kill. U-444, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Albert Langfeld, was a Type WWII on her 5th patrol, with 2 confirmed merchant ship sinks. Tate's first attack was conventional, a 10-charge depth charge pattern set for 350 feet. The U-boat survived, damaged, but operational. Tate immediately turned for a second attack, this time using the Hedgehog, maintaining steady course and speed at 12 knots. Harvester closed at 350 yards while tracking the submarine's evasive maneuvers. At precisely calculated range, the Hedgehog fired 24 projectiles splashed into the Atlantic. 15 seconds of silence. Then boom, a single explosion. The ASDIC operator reported the submarine's echo had changed character, becoming diffuse and disorganized. Tate circled back for another attack, but it wasn't necessary. Debris surfaced, wood fragments, oil, and a German sailor's cap. U-444 had been mortally wounded by a single Hedgehog projectile that penetrated her control room. She sank with all hands. This engagement demonstrated both the Hedgehog's potential and its unforgiving nature. 24 projectiles launched, 23 missed. 1 hit, but that single hit achieved what 10 depth charges could not. Tate later reported, "The silence after Hedgehog launch is unnerving for the crew. They're accustomed to feeling depth charge explosions shake the ship. But when we heard that single detonation, every man aboard knew exactly what it meant. We'd just killed a submarine with surgical precision." No discussion of ASW weapons would be complete without examining Captain Frederick John Walker, the Royal Navy's most successful U-boat hunter. Walker commanded the 2nd Escort Group aboard HMS Starling, a modified Black Swan-class sloop. Between 1942 and his death from exhaustion in July 1944, Walker was credited with sinking 20 U-boats more than any other Allied commander. Walker pioneered the creeping attack doctrine that maximized depth charge effectiveness. One ship would hold a stick contact while staying at least 1,000 yards from the submarine. A second ship would approach slowly at 5 to 8 knots, guided by radio instructions from the tracking ship. This maintained contact much longer and allowed more accurate depth charge placement. But when Starling was retrofitted with a Hedgehog in late 1943, Walker adapted his tactics brilliantly. In February 1944, Walker's group sank 6 U-boats in a single patrol, 3 with Hedgehog attacks, 3 with his refined depth charge techniques. The most remarkable was U-264 on February 19th. U-264, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Hartwig Lux, was caught on the surface at night by Starling's radar. The submarine crash-dived, but Walker's operators gained immediate ASDIC contact. Rather than charging in, Walker executed a patient stalk. For 45 minutes, Starling tracked U-264 as she maneuvered at 400 feet, trying every evasion tactic, sharp turns, speed changes, even lying silent on the bottom. Walker waited until the submarine stabilized on a steady course, probably believing she'd evaded detection. Then Starling moved in at 10 knots, maintaining perfect ASDIC contact. At 280 yards, the Hedgehog fired. 11 seconds later, 3 explosions rippled across the ocean. U-264's pressure hull ruptured in 3 places. The submarine sank like a stone, taking all 51 crew members to the bottom. Walker's after-action report is remarkably analytical. The Hedgehog permits aggressive prosecution of contacts that would otherwise be abandoned. Previous doctrine required breaking contact to attack. New doctrine permits continuous tracking while attacking. This fundamentally changes ASW from defensive to offensive warfare. The psychological effect on enemy commanders should not be underestimated. They can no longer rely on evasion during the attack blind spot. July 31, 1944. Western approaches. HMS Loch Killen, a new Loch-class frigate specifically designed around the Hedgehog system. gained contact with U-333 at 1,800 yards. Loch Killen represented the next generation of ASW vessels, purpose-built, with advanced powerful Hedgehog, and streamlined hull for rapid maneuvering. U-333's commander, Captain Lieutenant Werner Schwoff, was a veteran with 15 patrols and 9 confirmed sinks. He knew every evasion technique. When he heard Loch Killen's ASDIC, he immediately executed a sharp turn, changed depth from 250 to 450 feet, and reduced speed to minimum to decrease his acoustic signature. But Loch Killen's advanced ASDIC could track through the maneuvers. Her trained crew had executed over 50 Hedgehog attacks during workup training. Commander Price maintained steady approach, calculating the firing solution continuously as U-333 maneuvered. At 320 yards, with the submarine at 380 feet and turning hard to port, Price fired. The Hedgehog salvo entered the water ahead of the frigate. 14 seconds of silence, then boom, boom, boom. 5 consecutive explosions. U-333's hull was struck by 5 projectiles across a 40-foot span. The submarine's control room, forward battery compartment, and diesel room were all breached simultaneously. She imploded at 400 feet. Only 3 crew members survived the sinking, blown out through a ruptured hatch as the submarine made her death plunge. One of the survivors, Obermaschinist Klaus Hinnert, later testified, "We thought we were safe. The commander had executed perfect evasion. Then the world ended in 5 explosions. One moment we were at battle stations. The next moment I was in the water. I don't remember the transition. The submarine was just ... gone." While the Atlantic claimed most attention, the Pacific theater saw revolutionary ASW operations using Hedgehog. USS England, a Buckley-class destroyer escort, achieved the most remarkable submarine killing spree in naval history. 6 Japanese submarines in 12 days during May 1944. Pacific ASW differed significantly from Atlantic operations. Japanese submarines operated differently than U-boats: deeper diving depth, longer submerged endurance, but less sophisticated evasion tactics. American destroyer escorts like England were equipped with improved Hedgehogs, the Mark 11 version with better fuses and slightly increased range. Between May 19 and May 30, 1944, USS England sank I-16, RO-106, RO-104, RO-116, RO-108, and RO-105. Every single kill was achieved with Hedgehog attacks. Commander Walton Pendleton had drilled his crew relentlessly on Hedgehog tactics, and it showed. England's average time from initial contact to confirmed kill was under 20 minutes, phenomenal by any standard. The sinking of RO-108 on May 26 exemplifies Pendleton's mastery. Contact gained at 2,400 yards. England closed steadily while tracking the submarine's attempts to evade. First Hedgehog salvo at 300 yards. No detonation. Pendleton maintained contact and repositioned for immediate second attack. Second salvo, 35 seconds later, 2 explosions. RO-108 surfaced briefly, her conning tower shattered, then slid beneath the waves. Total engagement time, 8 minutes from initial contact to confirmed kill. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief, Pacific Fleet, sent a message to England: "They'll always be in England in the United States Navy." Commander Pendleton attributed his success directly to the Hedgehog. Depth charges might have achieved 1 or 2 kills through sheer persistence. The Hedgehog gave us the precision to kill efficiently and repeatedly. It's the difference between a shotgun and a rifle. Not every Hedgehog engagement ended in Allied victory. The weapon's effectiveness made U-boat commanders desperate, and desperate men take desperate measures. On March 11, 1943, the same day HMS Harvester sank U-444 with Hedgehog, Harvester herself was torpedoed and sunk by U-432. Commander Tate went down with his ship. He'd killed 1 submarine, but couldn't evade another. This illustrates the brutal mathematics of the Battle of the Atlantic. Even with superior weapons, even with tactical innovations, the escorts were often outnumbered and outgunned. A single escort might face multiple U. The Hedgehog could kill efficiently, but only 1 submarine at a time, and only if contact was maintained. The convoy battles of 1942-1943 saw escorts desperately shuttling between multiple contacts, trying to protect 50 merchant ships from 10 or more attacking U-boats. By war's end, Hedgehog-equipped vessels had achieved 47 confirmed U-boat kills in Atlantic Theater, 18 confirmed kills of Japanese submarines in Pacific Theater, 6 confirmed kills in Mediterranean Theater. Total 71 confirmed submarine kills. Depth charge kills during the same period, 1943 to 1945, 184 confirmed U-boat kills. Atlantic 32, Japanese submarine kills. Pacific 21, Mediterranean kills. Total 237 confirmed kills. The raw numbers favor depth charges, but context matters. Depth charge attacks outnumbered Hedgehog attacks by approximately 15 to 1. When normalized for number of attacks, Hedgehog was 5 times more likely to achieve a kill. Moreover, Hedgehog kills typically required fewer follow-up attacks and less time, allowing escorts to return to convoy protection duties faster. These engagements, from the desperate convoy battles of 1943 to the submarine hunts of 1944, that weapons technology alone doesn't win wars. The Hedgehog was a superior weapon, but it required training, tactical doctrine, and courage to employ effectively. Many escorts retained depth charges as primary weapons because crews were familiar with them, because they were psychologically reassuring, and because saturation bombing with multiple depth charges could sometimes succeed where precision failed. Technical evolution and VAR. The depth charge nor the Hedgehog remained static during the war. Both weapons underwent continuous refinement as engineers responded to combat reports and operational requirements. The depth charge family expanded significantly between 1939 and 1945. The British developed the Mark 10 heavy depth charge containing 500 pounds of explosive, nearly double the standard Mark 7. These heavy charges could kill at 6070 feet rather than the 40-foot range of lighter weapons. Sink rate also improved to 16 feet per second, reducing the submarine's evasion time. The Americans developed the Mark 9 depth charge, specifically optimized for the K-gun projector system. These charges could be thrown 150 yards to either side of the attacking ship, creating much wider attack patterns. A single destroyer equipped with stern rails and 4 K-gun projectors could create a massive underwater explosion grid covering 300 yards by 200 yards, an area of approximately 60,000 square yards. The Americans refined the Hedgehog into the Mark 11 version with several improvements. The projectiles were slightly larger, 75 pounds versus 65 pounds, providing more explosive punch. The contact fuses were redesigned to be more reliable in extreme temperatures. The spigot arrangement was modified to create a more circular pattern rather than elliptical, improving coverage against submarines that dove steeply during evasion. By 1944, the Mark 15 Hedgehog appeared with automatic reloading capability. Earlier versions required manual reloading. Each of 24 projectiles had to be manhandled onto its spigot, a process taking 5 to 10 minutes. The Mark 15 used a mechanical magazine system that could reload in under 2 minutes, allowing rapid follow-up attacks. This proved especially valuable in the Pacific, where Japanese submarines often operated in groups. The Americans also developed the Mousetrap, a smaller, head-throwing weapon for vessels too small to accommodate a full Hedgehog. Each Mousetrap projectile contained 60 pounds of explosive and used the same contact fuse principle. While less capable than the full 24-shot Hedgehog, Mousetrap could be fitted to patrol craft, subchasers, and even large Coast Guard cutters, extending precision ASW capability to smaller vessels. Britain's most advanced weapon was the Squid, which entered service in late 1943. Squid represented a different design philosophy than Hedgehog. Rather than 24 small contact-fused projectiles, Squid fired 3 large mortar bombs, each containing 200 pounds of Minalex explosive with proximity fuses. The Squid system was automatically coupled to the ship's ASDIC, which calculated the firing solution based on submarine depth, course, and speed. When fired, the 3 bombs were launched in a triangular pattern, automatically fused to detonate at the submarine's calculated depth. The result was 3 massive explosions, creating a lethal zone approximately 120 feet in diameter. Squid proved even more effective than Hedgehog, achieving kill rates of approximately 35 to 40% per attack, the highest of any ASW weapon in World War II. However, Squid required extensive deck space and could only be fitted to frigates and larger vessels. Only about 70 ships received Squid installations before war's end, compared to over 600 Hedgehog installations. Depth charge tactics also evolved. By 1944, the standard attack was the 14 charge pattern, 10 charges from the stern rails and 4 from projectors, creating a 3-dimensional box of explosions. Charges were set at multiple depths, some at 150 feet, others at 300 feet, others at 500 feet. This vertical spread ensured coverage regardless of the submarine's actual depth. Walker's creeping attack doctrine was codified and widely adopted by 1944, official doctrine now called 4 paired escorts, 1 tracking, 1 attacking. The attacking vessel approached at just 5'8", not slow enough that the tracking vessel's ASDIC could discriminate between the attacking ship and the submarine. When the attacker reached the calculated position, a full 14 charge pattern was dropped, with depth settings based on the tracking ship's real-time ASTIC depth readings. The most sophisticated escorts by 1944-45 carried both Hedgehog and depth charges, using them in coordinated sequences. Standard doctrine: first attack with Hedgehog while maintaining contact. If no detonation miss, immediately reposition for second Hedgehog attack. If second attack missed, execute creeping depth charge attack with massive pattern. This combination exploited each weapon's strengths. Hedgehog's precision for the initial attacks, depth charge's saturation coverage if precision failed. The lessons learned from Hedgehog and Squid influenced all subsequent ASW weapon development. Post-war weapons like the American SROC anti-submarine rocket and British Limbo maintained the ahead-throwing precision strike philosophy pioneered by Hedgehog. Modern navies completely abandoned the concept of attacking behind the ship. Forward-throwing became universal doctrine. Even modern homing torpedoes, launched from surface ships, trace their lineage to Hedgehog. The concept of launching toward a predicted intercept point while maintaining continuous sensor contact remains fundamental to ASW. The Hedgehog taught naval warfare a lesson that resonates today. In submarine hunting, precision and continuous tracking beat volume and hoping. Impact on the Battle of the Atlantic. Let's step back from individual engagements and examine how these weapons influenced the broader strategic picture. The Battle of the Atlantic wasn't decided by any single weapon or tactic. It was won through the cumulative effect of multiple technological and operational improvements. But among those improvements, the Hedgehog played a disproportionately important role. 1942. The crisis year in 1942, Allied shipping losses exceeded 6 million tons over 1,000 ships sent to the bottom. U-boat production accelerated. The average number of operational U-boats increased from 91 in January to 212 by December. Depth charges, despite improvements, simply couldn't kill submarines fast enough to offset this construction rate. The mathematical problem: here's the brutal calculation that kept Allied planners awake at night. If each U-boat sank an average of 4 merchant ships before being destroyed, which was roughly the 1942 average, and Germany produced 20 U-boats per month, then the U-boat force was sinking 80 ships per month at minimum. At that rate, even with maximum shipbuilding efforts, the Allies would run out of ships before Germany ran out of submarines. 1943, the turning point. May 1943 marked the turning point. That month, 41 U-boats were sunk, more than Germany could replace. Several factors contributed: improved radar, more escorts, better convoy tactics, closing of the mid-Atlantic air gap with long-range aircraft. But improved weapons, particularly Hedgehog, played a crucial role. Hedgehog deployment statistics by May 1943, Approximately 180 Allied escorts carried Hedgehog installations. These vessels achieved a kill rate of 18 to 20% per attack compared to the 5 to 7% rate for depth-charge-only vessels. This seemingly small difference had enormous strategic implications. A Hedgehog-equipped escort group could kill submarines 3 to 4 times faster than a conventional group, meaning fewer escorts were tied up in prolonged hunts and more were available for convoy protection. U-boat commander morale. German documents captured after the war revealed that Hedgehog profoundly affected U-boat commander psychology. A June 1943 report from BDU, Befehlshaber der U-boat High Command, noted, commanders report increasing effectiveness of enemy ahead-throwing weapons. Unlike conventional depth charges, these weapons provide no warning explosions. First indication of attack is often fatal detonation against hull. Recommended evasion techniques proving ineffective. Morale impact significant. Dunitz's strategic dilemma. Admiral Dönitz faced an impossible situation by mid-1943. His U-boats were being sunk faster than they could be replaced. His solution was to order commanders to be more aggressive surface at night, close to point-blank range for torpedo attacks, fight through the escorts rather than around them. This aggressive doctrine increased merchant ship sinks temporarily, but also dramatically increased U-boat losses. Hedgehog-equipped escorts exploited this aggressive doctrine ruthlessly. U-boats, closing for point-blank attacks, were perfect Hedgehog targets. The numbers tell the story. Compare U-boat fates in 2 6-month periods. November 1942, April 1943. Before widespread Hedgehog deployment, U-boats sunk. 87 sunk by depth charges, 61 70%, sunk by ahead-throwing weapons, 8-9% sunk by aircraft, ramming other, 18-21%. November 1943, April 1944, after Hedgehog deployment, U-boats sunk, 142 sunk by depth charges, 73-51%, sunk by ahead-throwing weapons, 41-29%, sunk by aircraft ramming, other, 28-20%. Interpretation. Ahead-throwing weapons went from 9% to 29% of kills in just 1 year, despite representing only about 30% of escort vessels. This indicates that Hedgehog-equipped ships were achieving kills at 3 times the rate of depth-charge-only vessels, exactly matching the statistical analysis. Convoy protection, efficiency. The strategic benefit extended beyond raw kill numbers. Hedgehog attacks were faster. Average engagement time was 12 to 15 minutes versus 30 to 45 minutes for depth charge attacks. This meant escorts could respond to multiple contacts more quickly and return to convoy protection duties faster. In the sprawling convoy battles where 10 U-boats might attack 50 merchant ships protected by 6 escorts, this time saving was literally the difference between merchant ships surviving or sinking. The final year. By 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic was effectively won. U-boat losses exceeded 50 per month throughout most of the year. New technology like schnorkel breathing tubes allowed U-boats to run diesel engines while submerged, reducing surface exposure, but this made them slower and more vulnerable to Hedgehog attacks. Snorkeling submarines maintained steady course and speed, ideal targets for precision ahead-throwing weapons. Did the Hedgehog win the Battle of the Atlantic? No single weapon wins a war. Victory came from the integration of many technologies: radar, sonar, direction finding, code breaking, escort carriers, long-range aircraft, and yes, improved weapons. But among those weapons, the Hedgehog stands out as perhaps the most revolutionary. It changed the fundamental tactics of submarine hunting from reactive defense to proactive offense. It transformed ASW from hoping to hit an evading target to tracking and killing with surgical precision. The depth charge remained useful throughout the war and for decades afterward, but the future belonged to ahead-throwing precision-guided weapons. The Hedgehog proved the concept and paved the way for every ASW weapon system that followed. The story of the Hedgehog and the depth charge is ultimately a story about innovation under pressure. In the darkest days of 1940 to 1942, when Britain's survival hung by a thread and the Atlantic ran red with the blood of merchant seamen, engineers and tacticians refused to accept that existing weapons were good enough. They questioned assumptions, experimented with new concepts, and ultimately created a weapon that changed the course of history. The men who served on those frigates, corvettes, and destroyers rolling in mountainous seas, hunting an invisible enemy that could kill them at any moment, deserve our remembrance. Whether they dropped depth charges or fired hedgehogs, they fought with incredible courage in the most unforgiving environment imaginable. Today, modern navies use weapons that would seem like science fiction to a 1943 escort commander, homing torpedoes, rocket-lodged depth bombs, helicopter-deployed, but the fundamental principles pioneered by the Hedgehog remain: maintain contact, attack ahead, use precision over volume, kill efficiently. The Battle of the Atlantic was won by the men who fought it and the weapons they wielded. The Hedgehog versus the depth charge wasn't just a technical comparison. It was a revolution in thinking about how to fight submarines, and that revolution saved the world. If you found this deep dive into naval weapons history fascinating, please like this video and subscribe for more detailed military history content. What other World War II weapons or battles would you like us to explore? Leave your suggestions in the comments below. And remember, history isn't just about what happened, but about understanding why it happened and how technology, tactics, and human courage combined to change the world. Until next time, stay curious about history.